Tonight's episode, the 2130.
A digital computer known as the 2130. Probabilities of his being able to commit murder.
98% negative. The remaining 2% is enough for me.
Howdy folks, and welcome to the Spaghetti Theater. For the Spaghetti Theater review. You're all looking wonderful, even though I can't see you. This time I'm going to review an episode of another one of my favorite television shows of all time.
The Fugitive.
It's The Fugitive, everybody! And it ran for 4 seasons back in the 1960s. Yeah, that long ago. And starred David Janssen as the main character, Dr. Richard Kimble. And boy, did he do a bang-up job. He owned that role. Harrison Ford did a pretty good job too, I'll give him some credit. When they started rerunning these shows back on the A&E channel back in the early 90s, I became obsessed with it, even though it was a few decades old even then. I would run home from school every day to see if this was the day that Dr. Richard Kimble found the one-armed man and was able to prove his innocence and stop running from Lt Gerard.
The police lieutenant obsessed with his capture.
And being forced to do all these stupid-ass jobs when he's a doctor, for crying out loud. But yeah, he has to deal with this obsessed police lieutenant who will not stop hounding him until he is captured and put back on death row, where he belongs in his eyes, for killing his wife, which we, the audience, know he didn't fucking do it. Since Richard Kimble, like MacGyver, is one of the last Boy Scouts, he's a friggin' saint. He couldn't hurt a fly. And this is one of those TV shows that tells you the entire plot in its opening title sequence every single time.
Falsely convicted for the murder of his wife.
Just in case you forgot, or this is your first time watching it. Just like Gilligan's Island. So you know what the fuck's going on. Why does this guy poop his pants every time he sees a cop? Oh, he's a fugitive.
To hide in lonely desperation.
Because prior to that, Richard Kimble was a doctor in Indiana, who returned home one day after a quarrel with his wife to find this one-armed man running from the vicinity of his house, to only discover his wife murdered inside, which he gets blamed for, of course, is tried, convicted, and sent to death row. Justice system works swiftly in the 1960s, now that they've abolished all Perry Masons.
En route to the death house.
Hooray for the American judicial system! Or whatever. I don't know what I'm talking about sometimes when it comes to the law, unless it happened on Perry Mason. Then, while being escorted to death row by train, by that same obsessed police lieutenant, just wants to make sure he gets there, the train derails and frees Richard Kimble from his awful fate. He even manages to hold down odd jobs and actually work for a living while being a fugitive. Unlike your average guilty as hell fugitive, he tries to acquire things legally. He's even a nice, snappy dresser most of the time, too. A classy as hell fugitive. The classiest one ever. So in his 4-year run, he had many adventures and met many character actors. Sometimes more than once. And one episode that always stood out to me is the one I'm going to talk about right now. The 2130. It features Lt Gerard, so you know it's going to be a tense episode, since not every episode features him.
Also starring Barry Morse as Lieutenant Philip Gerard.
The same with the one-armed man, who appeared in even less episodes, over its 120 episode run, of course. And this time, Lt Gerard gets help from an artificial intelligence supercomputer, only of the 1960s. So this is some pretty new shit. I didn't even know that kind of shit existed yet, seriously. Maybe it didn't. Maybe it was just made up for this episode. So it's a lot of those cards flying down conveyor belts Mannix shit. And bulky as hell computers that take up entire rooms. Just like the Agnes, with love. All thanks to this old doctor scientist guy. who wants to assist in the capture of Richard Kimble. So thanks, buddy, but I think Richard Kimble has enough problems without you and your stupid supercomputer, like dodging bullets from boy Kurt Russell. But anywho, take it away, opening credits. Pow! The Fugitive, a QM production, starring David Janssen as Dr. Richard Kimble, an innocent victim of blind justice, fucked in the ass by society. Well, our voice of God and narrator, canon himself, William Conrad, who's been doing voice work since the days of old-time radio. Only not anymore since he's dead. Says it a lot better than I do.
Change his identity to toil at many jobs.
Yep, there he is, toiling at many jobs. Changing his identity by turning that crew cut into the haircut we all know that's actually his real hairdo. The one-armed man, that's him, folks. Johnson! And the real deal, too. Actor Bill Rashish, I think I'm saying that right, or not. He only had one arm in real life, too. So way to be authentic with your one-armed man, Quinn Martin. Can't say the same for Lt Gerard, though. The American police lieutenant obsessed with his capture, actor Barry Morse here, I believe, is actually English, and fakes the accent nearly as well as Hugh Laurie did in House. So way to go, Barry Morse, asshole guy from Piano in the House. I didn't forget that shit. So here we go, Act 1. Yeah, they did a lot of shows like that back then, with 4 acts and an epilogue displayed on the screen. Just so you know, folks, so Act 1, it begins at this old rich doctor's fancy estate as his spoiled as hell daughter Lori gets home. And this guy is so well off, he even has his own chauffeur. And it's none other than Dr. Richard Kimble himself. Living right here on the grounds too. They gave him his own little room, using the fake name of Jack for now, and toiling at yet another low-level job that he was able to acquire. Driving this oldie around like he's Miss Daisy or something. Yet he's still able to maintain his nice guy status when his teenage girl asks him to take the blame for a fender bender that she got in with her dad's car. Again. So this happens a lot with her.
You know women drivers.
Yeah, this old fart is her dad. Must have had her when he was like 50. Anyway, she doesn't want him to find out that she did that to the car, or all her car privileges go out the fucking window, I guess.
You know women drivers.
So Richard Kimble agrees, of course, but does point out that she can't do this kind of shit all the time and expects someone to take the fall for her every time this kind of thing happens in life. It shows lack of responsibility, I believe. But he does it anyway because he's a saint.
Let's look at the car.
And a bit of a pushover at times. Comes with being a nice guy, I guess. Society. So cut to the next morning. As Richard Kimble takes the rap for denting Dr. Old Guy's ride. Which he's not that pissed about since Dr. Richard Kimble is so honest about it. And he's even willing to wear that stupid chauffeur's hat. He looks like such an idiot. So then Kimble drives the car around front for him when, the fuzz! This is never a good sign for Richard Kimble, as one even comes over to have a conversation with him. Turns out they're here about that dented car. So, oh shit. Which apparently was involved in a hit-and-run accident that landed some guy in the hospital.
Is there something wrong?
Well, hit and run. The man's in the hospital, and it looks like that car put him in.
Great. This is not looking any better for our good Dr. Kimble. Just what he needs. They're definitely gonna blame him for that shit once they talk to Dr. Old Guy and find out from him that he's the one who put the dent in the car. Even though he didn't. It was his stupid daughter.
You know women drivers.
So once again, Richard Kimble's good deeds have backfired in his face. Way to go, man. So he gets the fuck out of there. Car and all. When our good friend Mr. William Conrad, the voice of God, points out the obvious reasons why.
If you are Richard Kimble, you lead a complicated life. When the police start getting involved, you don't wait around to see what happens.
Thanks, God. You did say it better than I did with my stupid voice. So cut to later as Dr. Old Guy putters around all flustered after getting off the phone with the cops. Turns out that Jack the chauffeur was kind enough to leave his car at a nearby gas station before bailing town when another call from the police informs him of exactly who Jack the chauffeur really was, thanks to fingerprint CSI tech of the 1960s.
Dr. Richard Kimble?
He was Dr. Richard Kimble, the doctor who murdered his wife. That guy! Of course, the old guy remembers now.
Yes, of course I remember.
He was all over the news. He was the OJ of his time. Dr. Old Guy then goes on a little rant about how Richard Kimble escaped and has been on the run for 3 years now, eluding police.
All that time running around loose, the police haven't been able to track him down.
When the light bulb goes off in his little old guy head, bing! He has an idea on how to catch the great Richard Kimble. So cut to Richard Kimble so we can see what the fuck he's up to now. Running around in his chauffeur's outfit with that stupid hat. I hope he threw that shit out. But nope, he's actually trying to trade it in for some standard Richard Kimble street clothes. Cause they had thrift stores like that back in the 60s. For your fugitive on the run needs. The one-armed man shows up here at least once a month. So flip to the Medical Research Center for Science. And look who the hell's here, getting all impatient as he's being forced to sit around this waiting room. When he finally says, fuck it, I have a fugitive to catch. When Dr. Old Guy stops him.
Lieutenant Gerard, I'm Dr. Ryder.
Whose name is Dr. Ryder. But it's gonna be really hard not to call him Dr. Old Guy. Not at this point anyway. So Lieutenant Gerard goes off on how he was instructed by his superiors to gather up all of his Richard Kimble files and fly over to Dr. Old Guy's laboratory and just hand them the fuck over, I guess. Which is why Lieutenant Gerard seems so upset, naturally. Catching Richard Kimble is his pet project. Dr. Old Guy. Now what do you want? But don't worry, Lieutenant Gerard, because Dr. Old Guy here wants to help you. He wants to help you catch Richard Kimble, since he's still butthurt about him being involved in a hit and run with his car, and then lying about it. And being a fugitive and murdering his, you know, all that shit. And Gerard is so perplexed as to how Dr. Old Guy here plans on helping him catch the fugitive. A QM production. So cut to the answer. It's the offspring of the Agnes. And that supercomputer from Menix. It's the 2130. An artificial intelligence supercomputer of the 1960s.
Impressive, isn't it? It's not a brain, Lieutenant, it's computer.
And it's digital, apparently.
A digital computer known as the 2130.
But I somehow doubt it. So anyway, Dr. Old Guy claims that the 2130 has the ability to track down, locate Dr. Richard Kimble. Once they're able to establish his human pattern, of course.
Now, the first thing we must do is to try to establish a pattern.
He has no pattern.
Something Dr. Old Guy claims we all have as humans.
We all have patterns, Lieutenant, whether we realize it or not.
Thus the reason he needed all of the Kimble files, so he could enter all that information into the 2130. Way into the future. The more the 2130 knows about Richard Kimble, the more probable and precise the 2130's answers will be. So what do you think of that cool ass high-tech shit, Lieutenant Gerard? Huh? Don't need your ass anymore, I guess. Just like Captain Kirk in the Ultimate Computer. Or Mel Cooley in that Twilight Zone episode. You lost your job to a computer. Only not yet. The 2130 still has yet to prove itself, since Lieutenant Gerard thinks this is all stupid. But goes along with it because why the fuck not, right? Might as well give it a chance since you failed for 3 whole seasons now. So here you go, Dr. Old Guy. The legendary and long sought after Richard Kimble files. Do your thing. So flip flop, it's Act 2 now, everybody. When Richard Kimble almost gets a free ride from this car of teenagers who are kids these days with their hula hoops, transistor radios, cable TV, pretending to pick up a hitchhiker then driving away real fast. Dipshits. So this random guy who saw the whole thing runs over and immediately invites Richard Kimble over to his camper to have coffee with the fam.
Why don't you come back and have a cup of coffee with us?
Wow, what a trusting guy. He could be a serial killer or just Richard Diamond, private eye. So Mr. Trusting as Hell family man tells Kimble his plans.
Heading any place in particular, Mr. Grant?
California.
A lot of work out there this time of year.
That's where we're heading.
He's taking the family to good old California because he heard there was work out there, just like he's Tom Joad. I guess the Great Depression was still going on for these folks. Dragged all the way into the 1960s for some. He then invites Richard Kimble to come along with them,
Why don't you come with us?
since they're headed in the same direction, for the same reason. When Mom here finally intervenes, to to stop her dim-witted husband from inviting a possible Rutger Hauer from The Hitcher to join their family.
We got children to think about. We don't know this man.
And even Richard Kimble agrees. You're nuts, buddy.
You're right, Mrs. Oates. I appreciate the hospitality. I'll be gone.
Why don't you just drop your kids off in Pedophileville? Only now Mom's suddenly willing to give Richard Kimble a chance, since he did agree with her.
Just a minute.
Unless he's just a clever serial killer, hoping that would work. Only we know he's not, so you're in, buddy. Welcome to the family.
Can you drive?
Since you can drive and Mom here can't, cause, well...
Millie never did learn how. Probably just as well. You know women drivers.
Sexism, of course. It's the 1960s. Women drivers, they suck, right? This episode likes proving that twice now. Crappy women drivers running people over, making Richard Kimble take the blame. What a time to live in. Go Lyndon B. Johnson, or whoever the hell was president. Wait, Johnson? Johnson. Weird. So back to Dr. Old Guy and Lt Gerard as they input all the Richard Kimble files into the 2130. Can't we get a better name than that? It's like the Agnes, the 2130. That's even lazier. At least the Agnes was Agnes, not like the 5678. How about the Know-It-All 5000? Or just the Cyber Tracker? They even input Richard Kimble's known methods of operation. Places he's been, jobs he's held, modes of travel.
I'm trying to establish a geographical pattern. Dates, location, employment, means of transportation.
Shit like that. The more info, the better. Then science, technology. It's the wave of the future. Medics tech. Ba-dum-ba-dum. High-tech supercomputers.
I programmed all of the material and the technician is now encoding it onto these punch cards.
Cards. Very digital.
Then we use these cards to feed the data into the system.
Oh. And even super high-techier, big-ass printout sheets. They were still using that when I was a kid. We're living in the future, gentlemen. So what now? You enter that printout into the... Nope. You just scribble the word pattern on it. And hand it off to this lady to figure out.
Code this, please.
You go, girl. Thanks, Dr. Old Guy. You're a real master at your work. The 2130. And even with this high-tech typewriter, they still can't find Richard Kimble's so-called pattern. Failed immediately, the 2130. Time to shit can it and move on to the 2131. However, Dr. Old Guy is so confident in the 2130 that he insists there must be a friggin' pattern.
There must be a pattern.
Everybody has one, I said.
We all have patterns, Lieutenant, whether we realize it or not.
Or Gerard's files are a bunch of shit.
You and I on the 2130 are all blameless, Doctor. Kimble is simply not a predictable man.
Only it's none of that they decide. They just need to tell the 2130 the most important fact that they never told him.
The only thing that seems to have influenced Kimble is pursuit.
He's a friggin' fugitive. The title of the dang show. Meaning any pattern he creates will be influenced by that of pursuit. Pursuit from the law. And don't forget his biggest motivation of all.
There's the one-armed man.
The one-armed man.
Johnson. The one-armed man he's been looking for all this time. Which Lt Gerard thinks is a bunch of shit, as we know at this point.
Of course, he may exist only in Kimble's mind.
So they program all that shit into the 2130, hoping for a better answer. And what do you know? It worked.
There's your pattern.
Mostly. His pattern is 90% definite.
Pattern definite, 90%.
So there you go. Close enough, I guess. 2130.
It's winter, so according to this, he's either going west or southeast.
Which they narrowed down to 8 possible states that he might travel to.
Now you and I dig up statistics on those states,
And then down to 6 possible jobs that he might try to acquire.
where the greatest amount of non-union employment can be found.
One of them's right, so we gotta check them all out. Like the walnut groves here, perhaps. So let's cut there and see. Whisk! And there he is, alright, with his new family. The pick up any weirdo you meet, sons. Picking walnuts, of course. As the local cops show up with a flyer on Kimble. The classic flyer they always use. with that same stupid hairdo. Think they would have changed it at one point. Yet the walnut foreman doesn't remember the face of every Tom, Dick, and Dr. Richard Kimble that breezes through his walnut industry.
The walnuts are tearing through the hay.
But these kids do, of course, since he's now a member of their family, thanks to good old Dad. And they still recognize him, even with that stupid haircut.
Hey, Barney, look at they got a picture of our friend Mr. Grant.
So the older son sees all this happening and bolts back to Dr. Richard Kimble to warn him, as his two dopey siblings lead the cops right to him.
Mr. Grant, deputies, 2 of them, they got your picture. They're coming after you.
So now warned, Richard Kimble thanks little Billy here and gets the fuck out of there. As little Billy questions whether it was a good idea to let a possible killer escape.
Was it right?
When dimwitty Dad assures him, don't worry, he would have been just as stupid, son.
I would have done the same thing, I guess.
It runs in the family. Or we could just sense that he must be innocent. Because Richard Kimble's good guy vibes are so strong that they could send ripples that would reach the Klingon Empire.
It would have been glorious.
Yeah, he's that good of a man. The Mary Sue of fugitives. So cut to Lt Gerard, who talks with Dr. Old Guy on how close they just got to catching him at the Walnut Groves. But since we were also checking out 5 other possibilities, there wasn't enough manpower to catch the guy. So tough shit. Do better, 2130. You're going in the garbage can. A big ass garbage can. A huge dumpster. One of those hoarder dumpsters. Give it more information on Kimble to compute. As our guilt-ridden, spoiled, rotten daughter cries on top of the world. Well, at least she feels guilt. Oh, just confess already. You're the hit-and-run driver, not goody little two-shoes Richard Kimble. Then flip swish, it's Act 3 now, everybody. As Richard Kimble hops this freight train out of town, where he meets this goofball doing the very same thing. An artsy-fartsy writer type going by the name Homer or something.
My name is Homer.
You write it?
Yes, I am.
Writing his Odyssey.
17 months worth of notes there.
It's enough for the Odyssey.
Get it? See, Kimble noticed it too.
You're on the run, aren't you?
Clearly they're both on the run from something.
Join the club.
So Richard Kimble just takes a nap as Homer draws a picture of him.
Running around, sing around, just 20 minutes behind.
Little weirdo. He's not bad though. Then cut back to Dr. Old Guy again, who is forced to deal with this news reporter looking for a story. And hey, it's character actor Jason Wingreen, everybody.
Not on this run. No Willoughby on the line.
He was the first guy to do the voice of Boba Fett in The Empire Strikes Back.
He's no good to me dead.
I think he was uncredited. Look it up. Anyway, word's out that Lt Gerard's in town, and working closely with Dr. Old Guy. Plus, with all the recent activity with Dr. Richard Kimble, he knows something's up, and is willing to start printing any shit he wants, unless you give him a story. The real one.
He's no good to me dead.
So in order to keep this idiot from printing in his newspaper that there's a computer tracking Dr. Richard Kimble now, of which Kimble himself will find out about, meaning he'll change his pattern, and this will be all for naught, so he promises him the real story, but only after they catch him. Now's not the right time, you idiot news guy, and Boba Fett agrees.
As you wish.
So Boba Fett goes along with it.
You have a deal.
So cut to the 2130 and that entire room that it takes up, as they print out the possibilities of where Richard Kimble may seek employment next. Since the Walnut Grove thing didn't work out,
There's been a walnut uprising.
would he pick like 10 walnuts before he had to run the fuck out of there? But fuck the 2130, because Lt Gerard computes all this shit in his head all by himself quicker than the 2130.
So my guess is Salt Lake City and Portland, Oregon. Let's see how you stack up against the computer, Lieutenant.
Way to go, Gerard.
You seem to have computer blood.
Head of the class, buddy. You're just as good as the 2130. So he's either in Salt Lake City, Utah, or Portland, Oregon. So they contact the authorities in both places and send them to the local freight yards to see if Richard Kimble shows up. So cut to that train cart that Kimble's in as he arrives outside of Portland, Oregon, where the police are already waiting for him, as Homer spots them and immediately loses his shit.
Cops, lots of them, just waiting.
And pulls a knife on Kimble. Calm the fuck down, buddy. He's a fugitive. But he assumes those cops are after him. So now in panic mode, he just grabs his shit and jumps off the train. The cops spot him, of course, and go right after him. Another lucky break for Richard Kimble, with Mr. Diversion here. The random element the 2130 didn't think of. So Homer runs for his life and shoots a cop dead, only to be gunned down himself moments later. Way to go, Homer. Time to go up to that big odyssey in the sky. Do robots dream of electric sheep? I guess he'll find out, maybe. That's when this cop recognizes Homer.
That's not Kimble. No. Tell you who it is, though. It's Macklin. Marty Macklin.
He's actually a criminal named Marty Macklin.
I mean, the kid who shot those two guys from Salem? And that prison guard in Seattle.
And they even find his little sketch of Kimble, which the cop recognizes as Kimble. By comparison. Way to go, Marty Homer Macklin. You missed your calling as a police sketch artist. No! And with all this shit, Kimble runs free again. Across the train yard at full speed and peeks back real quick to see, nope, no cops, and continues his flight. Across the great American railroad. Go, man, go! That boy's running full. Then cut back to Dr. Old Guy, who's starting to have a change of heart about capturing Dr. Richard Kimble with the 2130. Since now that he knows every detail on Richard Kimble's life, he even knows that he mowed lawns for a quarter as a kid.
Back to 11 years old when he was mowing lawns for a quarter.
Cause that's relevant too, I guess. He's beginning to question whether he's even guilty. So he discusses it with his daughter, Little Miss Hit and Run, and let the chauffeur take the blame with his stupid hat. Which is another thing he can't wrap his old guy mind around. Besides that hit and run incident, and of course the murder of his wife, Dr. Richard Kimble seemed like a decent guy. He just oozes perfection so well that even Dr. Old Guy is now convinced that he's innocent. He even gets his daughter to confess to that hit and run.
I tried to tell you before, but I had the car. I'd had some beer. This man, he just stumbled right into the street, right in front of me. I wasn't afraid of the police. I was afraid of you.
So Kimble's off the hook on that one, thank God. So father and daughter now realize their relationship needs a little work, since she was so terrified to what his reaction would be to telling him that she was involved in the hit and run, and nearly killed the guy. And yes, they do tie up that part of the storyline too.
I kept in touch with the hospital, Dad. The man's out of danger now.
She's not a total shit. Hit and run guy will live another day. Only what about Richard Kimble? Now that Dr. Old Guy believes he's innocent, he doesn't really want to help aid his capture. Only that doesn't matter now. Now that Lt Gerard's here and knows how to use the 2130 without Dr. Old Guy's help. So there's not much you can do, I guess, except go smash the shit out of the 2130. A man's gotta work, Mr. Whipple. Only nope, he comes up with a brilliant idea.
Yes, I'd love to talk to one of your reporters.
Remember Boba Fett, the newspaper reporter guy?
What if he doesn't survive? He's worth a lot to me.
Who wanted to print a big scoop on the Richard Kimble story?
You'll destroy everything that we're trying to accomplish. I'm sure you don't want to do that.
I want a story, Doctor, that's all.
Put Captain Solo in the cargo hold.
And you'll have it.
That's right. They didn't put that scene in there for no reason, or just as filler. It's time to play the Jason Wingreen card.
A man named Bassett.
And give him that story. This way, if Kimble reads the newspapers, which he does from time to time, he might read this story and know that there's a computer tracking him now. Brilliant, Old Guy. So cut to that very newspaper article. Just like that. You go, Boba Fett the reporter.
He's no good to me dead.
Because a good reporter doesn't just get a good story. A good reporter makes it great.
Chief, here's that story in Eastside murder case. The way I see it, it's a banner headline, front page, maybe make a joke.
There's only one P in rapist.
So flip slap. It's Act 4 now, everybody. The final act. As Lt Gerard reads that article and realizes that if Kimble sees this shit, he'll change his pattern, since a computer is tracking him based on pattern. That's when Dr. Old Guy tries to make his point about Kimble being innocent, possibly.
Lieutenant, I've conducted an experiment.
By asking the 2130 itself the possibility of Richard Kimble committing murder.
And then I asked for the probabilities of his being able to commit murder under any circumstances.
And the answer?
98% negative.
98% negative. So, pretty much no. In your face, Lieutenant. Only he don't care. Can you guess why?
Remaining 2% is enough for me.
2%! Oh, you dog, Lieutenant. He's not wrong, but he totally is. I love his dedication, though. It could have been 99.9%, and he still would have backed it on that 0.1% alone. The nut. So take that 98% and shove it up your ass, Dr. Old Guy, and let's get back to work already. Which they do, under the assumption that Richard Kimble has not yet read this newspaper article. It did just come out. And the 2130's possibility is blood control in Portland, Oregon. So he can go very far, maybe. So let's cut over to flood control in Portland, Oregon, and see if he's even there. The 2130 could be full of, nope, he's there, the predictable pattern-having idiot, just like him, to hop on the next flood control truck out of town as a laborer with a new fake name.
Smith, William. Smith, William.
Starts to get real tense too, as we see that Lt Gerard is flying in personally right now to Portland, Oregon to intercept that very same flood control truck that Kimble's on. Since the 2130 knows exactly where he is. You could cut the tension with a knife here. Even the score agrees. I love this track for some reason.
And yep, I own the whole soundtrack on Glorious CD, folks. It's real. It has that piece of music amongst a lot of others. 24 tracks. Yeah, go Fugitive. That's how much I love it.
So a roadblock is set up to stop that truck when it arrives. As we cut to Kimble in the back of that very truck, when he notices this guy reading a newspaper. And yup, he spots that article that Jason the Boba Fett Wingreen printed about the 2130.
What if he doesn't survive? He's worth a lot to me.
He tries to borrow it when the guy's done, but the guy's kind of a cheap-ass dick about it.
I take a look at your paper. What's it worth to you?
And makes him pay him a dime just to borrow it.
What if I give you the price of the paper?
And I get the paper back.
For a few seconds.
Yeah.
Which he does, of course, reads the article, realizes he's being tracked by a computer based on his pattern, so gives that pattern a run for its money, and just leaps out of the moving truck, hops a fence, and runs into the random hills of Oregon. Good luck, buddy. No flood control for you, I guess. Now we're down a guy.
Hey, some guy just jumped you!
So, 6 to 8 miles later, Lt Gerard gets the bad news. At that roadblock they set up. He then searches the back of that truck and finds that newspaper that he must have read.
Was he reading this?
And then finds out what he paid to read it.
He gave me a dime for it.
You'll never get a better bargain than that.
Ha ha! Snap, Gerard! That was a good one. No better bargain than that. The letter side of Lt Gerard. So, flip, splat! It's the epilogue, everybody. Time to wrap this shit up. As Lt Gerard packs up his shit and heads back to Stafford, Indiana, his home.
Lt Gerard from Stafford, Indiana, Kimble's hometown.
Until his next guest appearance, since now the 2130 is useless to him, since Kimble knows all about it. So alone now, Lori the daughter wonders if Lt Gerard will ever catch Richard Kimble.
Do you think you'll ever catch him?
Possibly. He knows more about Richard Kimble than anyone else.
Then, realizing that the 2130 still knows just as much about Richard Kimble as Lt Gerard does, that perhaps there's still a chance.
The 2130 knows just as much.
For shits and giggles anyway, Dr. Old Guy has the probability of Richard Kimble changing his pattern now that he knows a computer's tracking him, programmed into the 2130 to see where he might be. And its answer? Cranberry bogs, huh? Big change from flood control and walnut picking.
Cranberry bogs. What an awful place to be this time of year.
Oh, shut up, Lori. You never worked a day in your life. I'm sure it's great. Free cranberries. All the cranberries you can eat. So fuck it. Cut to the cranberry bogs and let's see if he's there. I guess it's possible and hot shit, he's there! The 2130 was right again. So, Good thing Lt Gerard gave up on that shit and went home to catch you the old-fashioned way. Stay at home and wait for the next phone call. So Richard Kimble's problems only keep getting worse. Since, as the voice of God says,
If you are Richard Kimble, fugitive, your already complicated life has become more so. You can no longer rely upon your instinct, because for all you know, your pursuers may be machines, and you are merely a human being.
yeah, Skynet type shit. People have always feared that computers will become so smart that they'll take over the world. And that's it, as Dr. Richard Kimble heads out to pick cranberries in the bogs and continue looking for the one-armed man, because who knows, he might be there too, picking cranberries with one arm. And this episode is over, and Richard Kimble still remains a fugitive. Ba-dum-bum-bum! Which leads me into my final thoughts on this Season 3 episode of The Fugitive, the 2130. A very exciting and action-packed episode in my opinion, as far as Fugitive episodes go. It's one of my favorite of the entire series. Richard Kimble didn't really get to connect with anybody in this episode, or do any real good for anyone, as he would normally do in a slower paced episode. He was too busy dodging the artificial intelligence of the 2130 the whole time. He barely had time to take a breather.
He's no good to me dead.
He pretty much went walnut picking for nothing. He wasn't even there long enough to get paid. I love the idea of them bringing in a 60s supercomputer to track down Richard Kimble, when technology like this was still new, if not non-existent at the time. It was about as science fiction-y as The Fugitive would ever get. This episode was written by Daniel Ullman, who also wrote the 1950s science fiction film The Maze. I only mention it because I did a review on this movie. It was my first review pretty much, for the most part. And the last thing I want to mention is this one cool ass fact. This guy, the writer on the train, who actually was a murderer, was played by Hampton Francher. He was a writer in real life too, and co-wrote the screenplay for Blade Runner, which was based on the book there by Philip K. Dick. Was that the guy's name? Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep or something? Yeah, this guy co-wrote the screenplay. I thought that was an interesting fact. It's pretty much the only writing credit too, yeah. He also wrote the screenplay for the new Blade Runner too, that 2049 Blade Runner, which I never saw. So way to go, Homer. And with that, I'll end my first look at an episode of the original Fugitive TV series with the 2130. Thanks again to all my subscribers and leavers of comments, as I always love to say. It's one of my things. Adios for now, folks, and I'll see you at the theater. This theater. Bye. I know this episode wasn't exactly fair to women drivers, but I did notice one thing. That chick over there. They don't even show her face. I'm gonna go ask that chick out. I bet she's real fucking hot. They were real nice to let this lady work here, plus she's the one who did all the friggin' work, if you noticed. Old guy hands off the work to this lady, and she's the one that computed everything. Meaning she's probably the most intelligent person in this whole episode. How about you and I go out for a drink after work, unplug this 2130, and get close. It's the 60s. I can still do this, I bet. Come on, let me see your face. Ah! Now I see why they didn't show her face.
You know women drivers.
Put Captain Solo in the cargo hold.